Last year I took it upon myself to play Nintendo 64 games only for a week to see how much fun it was to have only access to that console in 2023. I was pleasantly surprised with how much fun it was to unplug from the high octane and always connected world of modern gaming for 7 days, and it was a video that a lot of you guys really enjoyed. In the comment section we shared our experiences of the console and what games we all loved, and I really thought it was cool that a piece of the retro gaming community shared their stories with me. As I said back in that video, I had plans to return to this format with other consoles, and while it did take me a year to do another one of these, I am officially back with another retro gaming challenge. However, I have made some changes to this, as some of you said that 7 days was nothing and that you could play retro consoles for a much longer period of time. Well, this got me thinking, what would it be like to have only a retro console for an entire 30 days? And so with some revisions to the format of this video and a much longer time frame to enjoy these games in, I set out to see what it would be like to have only the access of another retro console in these modern times. This time, let's see how the Nintendo 64's main rival and competitor holds up in 2024, the original Sony PlayStation. Just like with the Nintendo 64, we had a PS1 in my house growing up for a bit, although I was way too young to have anything outside of a few memories of any of the games on it. I do want to say that I'm not looking to compare the Nintendo 64 and the PS1 in this video because of the large variations in the times that I played them, and with my Nintendo 64 video, due to the much smaller window of only 7 days, I avoided a lot of the best Zelda and Mario games and longer games like that on the Nintendo 64. So this wouldn't really be a fair comparison to make. I also want to make note of that I am going to include that I have already played Final Fantasy VII and Silent Hill, both in this review, as games that I enjoyed on the console. Maybe we'll revisit the Nintendo 64 one day and do a whole month, and I'll include the fact that I just finished Majora's Mask in that review as well. Let me know if that's something you guys would be interested in the comments below. Anyways, I began this challenge on August 12th, 2024, and for the next 30 days, all I had was a PS1 games list and a dream, and a lot of time on my hands. Before we get into the challenge itself though, let's talk a little bit about the history and the development of the PlayStation itself. The beginning of the PlayStation would be all down to sound, or rather a partnership with Nintendo over a sound processing chip that would be used in Nintendo's Super Nintendo Entertainment System. This was achieved by Ken Kutaragi, then head of a hardware engineering team at Sony, who became interested in video games after noticing his daughter's love for the Nintendo Famicom system. It was through watching how she interacted with video games and playing them himself that Kutaragi began believing in the video game console's potential to become a commonplace in the average family household like a television. Developing this chip with Nintendo was done so behind Sony's back, however, and it almost spelled the end of Kutaragi's time with the company. At the time, Sony, in alignment with social stigma that, while much more diminished these days, is still not uncommon to hear from uneducated mouths, believed that video games were essentially interactive toys for only children, and were really not interested in the least bit in entering this market. Though after Sony's then president Norio Oga had took time to consider Kutaragi's fate, he believed that this hardware engineer had a bright future and kept him on board. This partnership will lead to Nintendo to look to Sony in the near future once more when rival Sega unveiled their plans for the Sega CD, which was released as an accessory for their Genesis console that would allow for games created on CD-ROMs to be played on it. Nintendo looked to Sony, who had an extensive history and a huge involvement in the creation of the CD-ROM format. A new console attachment for the Super Nintendo was to be created called the PlayStation, which would allow for Nintendo to further compete with Sega in this new disc-based venture. CD-ROMs were much cheaper to mass produce than cartridges, and they also featured higher capacities, meaning that games could be bigger and better. As a part of this agreement, Sony was also planning on creating a brand new console of their own that would allow gamers to play both CD-ROM games as well as SNES cartridges. Unfortunately for Sony at the time, Nintendo then committed what has been called one of the worst betrayals of all time in the gaming industry. Just days before Sony was to take the stage to make their big announcement of their new venture in their partnership with Nintendo, Nintendo secretly canceled all plans with Sony and approached their rival Philips for a deal that would see Nintendo maintain the majority of rights, power, and control over the creations made within the partnership. As I said, this was done without Sony's knowledge, and so the announcement of their new project under Nintendo was still made according to their plan, just for them to be humiliated the very next day when Nintendo's chairman spoke to the contrary. Sony would decide to move forward with their plans to create the PlayStation, with Ken Kutaragi taking a large role in the development of the system. Their plans were to create a console that could push the video game industry into the 3D space, with a focus on securing third-party games to fill the system's library. Sega and Nintendo had largely relied on in-house development for big titles, and this was a strategy that worked well for both of their console lines. It would be this focus on developing and propping up their own in-house games that would lead to many third-party developers siding with Sony and signing on to make games for the PlayStation. Developers were also intrigued by the CD-ROM format, as it was much cheaper to produce than the cartridges for other systems. Leaning into these partnerships and this team approach based to making video games was a brilliant decision by Sony, and in combination with the more widely accessible and cheaper CD-ROMs as their foundation, development times for a large number of games and profit potential made this newcomer PlayStation a very attractive option for many developers. What had started out as a humiliating betrayal by Nintendo ended with Sony releasing the PlayStation in Japan in 1994, and they were flying off the shelves. What had once been considered as a toy by Sony executives had just become a moment that would define the future of their company and the video game world as a whole. Sony's advertisements for the PlayStation focused on differentiating itself from the other consoles of the time, and they wanted to focus on getting an older generation into gaming. PlayStation ads would feature edgier marketing to back this claim up as a way to tap into a market that likely held similar beliefs to the stigma that video games were just for kids. In the summer of 1995, just 3 months before PlayStation would release in the United States, an iconic moment would unfold at E3. Right after the surprise drop of the Sega Saturn for the price of $399, Sony's head of development Steve Race would take to the microphone to simply announce, a whole $100 less than the Sega Saturn, before promptly returning to his seat to the approving cheers of those in attendance. This, in combination with retail stores and consumers alike feeling a bit frustrated and unprepared for the immediate release of the Saturn, would do damage to Sega's sales for the Saturn, and pave the way in the United States for the PlayStation to release in September of 1995. The 5-month head start by Sega in the US was immediately overtaken by the PlayStation in just its first 48 hours on shelves. It would go on to become the first game console ever to reach 100 million units sold. These numbers would see it stand on top of the stack of these three companies' console releases, with it even outselling the later released Nintendo 64. Some have attributed part of this win to Nintendo losing a lot of third-party support for their consoles due to Sony building such good relationships with those companies around them, and because of Nintendo doubling down on the more expensive cartridges, which were not as an attractive offer for some developers. Sony had made their statement with its PlayStation, and had already stepped out of the fire as a big player in the console market. In its 11-year life cycle, the PlayStation would cement itself as one of the best-selling and most beloved consoles of all time. It's looked back on with extreme fondness, and it's kind of seen as this turn of the modern gaming era. So, what would it be like to only have this legendary PlayStation 1 nearly 30 years later as my only choice for a console in 2024? Well, for the next month, I was going to find out. So the rules for this challenge were pretty simple. I could play any game that was released on the original PlayStation for 30 days. No modern games, no other consoles. If I was going to be playing a video game, it was going to be a PlayStation 1 game. I took away the restriction I had last time of not playing longer games, and I just decided that it didn't matter how many games I played, as long as I had fun at the end of the day, and I wasn't going to limit myself to just shorter titles. This was especially because I had 30 days to work with. So, what was it like to have only a PS1 for my gaming entertainment in 2024? Let's take a look at how the challenge went overall, and a bit later, we'll talk about some games that I loved and some that I didn't. I decided to do this on a whim, and just immediately began researching games to play through, binge watching all of these YouTube videos that I could find on the best PS1 games of all time, or finding lists of the most underrated JRPGs on Reddit. You get the meme. I then compiled a list of them that seemed the most interesting to me, and got to work on organizing a few key players that I really wanted to make sure I got around to before these 30 days were up. The first 9 days did feature a variety of games, but only one game really took my attention for that first week. This game was Suikoden, a legendary game that has been endlessly recommended to me over the years by friends of the channel. I finally decided to jump in on this game after hearing so much about it, and I actually have a review of this game coming soon, so if you don't want to miss that and see a more in-depth look of how much I like this game and why I enjoyed it so much, please do subscribe to the channel. So, while I did have some brief glances and trial runs into the original Twisted Metal, Incredible Crisis, and WWF SmackDown 2, nothing really drew my attention away from seeing Suikoden all the way through. Of the other 3 games I mentioned, Incredible Crisis was the one I probably played the second most, and it was a pretty fun palate cleanser when I just needed some fast-paced WarioWare-ass mini-games to play. Incredible Crisis is a game that I chose because of a soundbite that has been burned into my brain since I heard it as a little kid. My dad used to get these magazines that would come with demo discs that featured a whole bunch of trials for upcoming games. One of them featured a short demo of the opening level of Incredible Crisis, in which the player takes control of an office worker who has to run away from a wrecking ball that's on the loose. The scream that he lets out is a sound that for whatever reason has just stuck with me over all these years. For years, I had no idea what this game was called. I just remember playing a game where an office worker runs away from a giant boulder and lets out this ugly ass scream. After these first 9 days, I had finished Suikoden and played a decent amount of Incredible Crisis, and I was feeling pretty inspired. On day 10, I took an off day and just spent some time with my family, as I felt I just needed time to decompress and consider my thoughts and feelings on the JRPG classic I had just marathoned. After this break, I jumped right back in, and for the next few days I wanted to try out a whole bunch of games and just give them some love. I chose a handful of games that had interested me, and I went through them one by one with the only goal being to have fun. If I didn't enjoy something that I felt like I had given enough of a chance to, I put it down. So the next few days were filled with some Gran Turismo, Tekken, and Ape Escape, all of which were pretty fun in their own right. This second phase of playing, though, did see me get to the halfway mark of my challenge, and I'm not gonna lie, I started to feel a yearning for some of the modern games I had picked up over the last year that were waiting to be played. I can't quite put my finger on it, but I did start to feel a bit of a burnout at this stage, and I was having trouble sticking with any one game for an extended period of time. This led to me having a few days where I really didn't play anything at all, and I would just watch movies or work on some content ideas, or yes, even go outside and touch grass. This isn't to say that any of the games that I had played up until this point were bad necessarily, I just felt like there was a lot of inspiration for future content ideas that were just looking me right in the face every time I walked past my stack of PS5 games. However, this would change drastically when I began playing Metal Gear Solid. This game really got me back on track, and as someone who has only beaten Metal Gear Solid 4 and 5, I was really excited to see what the beginning of this franchise on the PlayStation consoles looked like. The best part is, it didn't disappoint. Metal Gear Solid is so impressive even to this day with how much thought was put into its gameplay, and I constantly found myself being pleasantly surprised with how well it held up. I'm not going to focus too much on that here though, as I want to save most of my discussion for this game for another future review. Subscribe. So, Metal Gear Solid brought me right back into being interested in the PS1, and while I wouldn't say that I played this every single day like I had with Suikoden, it really helped me find my footing with the console once more. I noticed that this meant that most of my interest was being held by yet another narrative-focused game, which made me come up with a system. I wanted to find a good balance of having a main narrative game to play while also having a couple more fun-focused, less story-heavy games that were just there as palate cleansers, like how Incredible Crisis was for Suikoden for me. And my next choice in the search for a trusted companion game to my Metal Gear Solid playthrough was a bona fide hit, and that was Tony Hawk Pro Skater 2. These two games saw me through most of the final days of August and even into September with just how different they were and how well they've aged. So yeah, I hit a rough spot in there around the 12th day or so, but it just felt like a few days later I had found that spark again that led me to deciding to do this challenge in the first place. So during this week or so, I would go between Metal Gear Solid and Tony Hawk Pro Skater 2, though with this new wind in my sails, I also returned to some games that I'd kind of lost interest in at one point as well. Ape Escape found its way back into my rotation again, and I'm really glad that I decided to pick it up again. It kind of scratches that collectathon platformer itch that something like Mario 64 does, where you're just dropped into levels, but instead of collecting stars, you're collecting little monkeys. So I continued on my stealth journey while also picking up other games here and there, and of course playing some Tony Hawk for the next few days, and all was looking up. So I'm feeling pretty good with the PS1 at the turn of the month. I had 12 days to go before my challenge was complete, and I was making some Metal Gear Solid progress on my journey with Snake. That was so stupid, I'm gonna leave it in though. I kept an even pace in completing Snake's mission to stop Metal Gear, and I ended up finishing this game on the 2nd of September, which I thought was pretty quick. I had beaten two rather important PS1 titles to add to my already finished PS1 games from previous playthroughs of Silent Hill and Final Fantasy VII that I mentioned, and it was a cool feeling to now have understood what made these games great in their respective times. And so I had 10 days left on the challenge, and with that time I had planned to try a couple of JRPGs. So much hope here to get into Xenogears or the Lunar Story, Suikoden 2, Final Fantasy IX, and I played none of them. I got pretty busy at work and settled for just working on writing review scripts for quite a few days of those last 10 days, so that's how I used my free time, to kind of make some of these videos. It wasn't until day 27, with only 3 days left, that I would find some free time and a pair of games to spend it on. The first of these games was Crash Bandicoot, which I've always wanted to give some time to as it looked like a lot of fun. And what I would come to find is that this game is a lot of fun, and a ton of frustration, but in a good kind of addicting way. This game has ADHD energy, which I really appreciate a lot. It's just fast and it's perfect to pick up when you just have a couple minutes to play, but it also offers enough of a challenge that it kind of has that one more try mentality that kept me coming back. And the other game in this final pairing is one that I've always wanted to try because of just how weird and awesome it sounds. That's right, folks. The second and final game that I chose for my 30 days was Parasite Eve. Just what this game is sounded so intriguing to me, and the fact that it was created by Square is just a huge bonus. I also chose these games because they are relatively short, and I wanted to see if I could finish them before the end of the challenge if they ended up being games that I enjoyed. Unfortunately, I only ended up finishing about half of Crash Bandicoot, but I did beat Parasite Eve, which made for a pretty solid end to my challenge. I made it through the 30 days, and for the next week I took some time to just consider my thoughts and how to approach writing about my experience with only playing the original PlayStation games in modern times. So let's talk about my overall experience now. I already talked about how the PS1 was a generation-defining piece of tech, and how these new possibilities were fully taken advantage of to produce games that would define trends for the years to come, create or redefine series that players would come to love, and release games that have been hailed as some of the greatest games ever made. The PS1 deserves all that praise, and it's easy to see why so many people have fond memories of this console and the plethora of games that it brought to the homes of its audiences. I decided to do these retro challenges to give myself a reason and project to research for, as well as to see how well the love of these consoles withstands a test of time. How has the PS1 aged over the last 30 years? Are the legendary games of this era, the golden age of some genres according to fans, still fun today? Alternatively, I wondered if returning to retro consoles would even help me understand some of the discourse from the older generations of gamers who think that modern gaming and its problems are not worth the money or time anymore. From playing the PS1 for the last month, I can say that in my experience, I can kind of understand both sides of that fence. Like with my week-long Nintendo 64 challenge, I found that unplugging from the internet when playing video games made for a cozy experience without any of the bullshit that comes attached with modern titles. Because there's no DLC, there was no feelings of playing a half-baked AAA title whose rushed to release with its cosmetics or loot boxes and all that other stuff. It was nice to sit down and play a game all the way through beginning to end. I found myself looking forward to locking in on games I was really enjoying throughout my challenge, and I also really liked that a great number of these games of this era were pretty challenging. A lot of modern games can kind of be hand-holdy, which makes sense because they're trying to be inclusive and appeal to an audience with a wide variety of skill sets and gaming backgrounds. The problem with this is that some games feel like they're just too easy, or like the game companies don't trust us as gamers to be able to learn. A perfect example of this is the newer Pokemon games. The old games like Red, Blue, Gold, Silver, Ruby, Sapphire, all of those games felt challenging. When the rival chooses their starter, they choose one that has a type advantage to yours, which kind of sets the tone of the difficulty in those earlier games. Are they the hardest games ever made? Absolutely not. But they can be challenging in their own ways, and this is something that the series feels like it's lost over the years. And I like a lot of the Pokemon games that I've released after this generation. The games that I played on both the PS1 and the Nintendo 64 felt like they respected my ability to learn organically as a gamer. And while there are tutorials in some of the games, and there's also, manuals that would come with a lot of them that would teach you how to play, it really felt like it was more of a hands-off thing, which is just something that I enjoyed a lot. And sure, it can be mind-numbingly frustrating to perfectly land on a tiny-ass piece of wood on Crash Bandicoot just to be killed by a stupid boar, or how some of the boss fights in Metal Gear Solid took me quite a few tries to conquer, but it makes that final try, the one attempt where you get everything right and you actually overcome those bastards, so much sweeter of a reward. And this isn't to say there aren't difficult games today. I mean, we have the Souls kind of games. I'm just trying to say that in my opinion, the average game of then is noticeably more difficult than the average game of now. Now, as for the games, this was an era of experimentation by many companies, which is something that I miss a lot in older consoles, and it's something that we don't really see much of today, where it feels like the label AAA back in the day maybe meant something exciting to look forward to, and nowadays, at best, causes for cautious optimism. Many releases feel like they're checking financial boxes to appease shareholders rather than actually listening to their audiences and what they want. And this is something that didn't come across as much in these older consoles, where developers felt like they were more trusted by their companies to take risks. Square in this era alone released a fighter, a horror game, a strategy RPG, a kart racer, a ton of new RPG titles with different IPs, and many, many more games that people would come to love and enjoy and even look back on fondly. I think that this is one of the key things that makes gamers so nostalgic for the past, as these times were ones in which there were so many releases and hidden gems because companies were just allowed to throw some more ideas out there and have a little more freedom. And finally, I was pleasantly surprised by the depth of mechanics in the games that I did play, considering the time in which they were released. As I said earlier, I didn't play much PS1 due to being just a little ploop during its life cycle, and because of this, I had no expectations or context outside of the few games that I have played in my adult life, or what I've seen on YouTube videos about these games. Some of these games really blew me away with just how much they were able to include or how deep the gameplay could truly go. Games like Final Fantasy VII with its tons of mini-games and depth of content, Suikoden with its skirmish and dueling battles and massive cast of recruitable characters, and Metal Gear Solid with its everything. Games both complex and simple felt like they were designed with a lot of love and thought into making a fun experience, and I appreciate all of that attention to detail and thoughtfulness. Now, with all that being said, I also did have some moments where I felt disinterested in the PlayStation 1 during this month, and I want to talk about what I think the reasons for this were. Just want to reiterate here that these are my opinions, and it's not my intention to take a dump on anyone's favorite games, just to share what I thought. First of all, which is no fault of the PS1, I've just been in the mood to catch up on a lot of my backlog, which is mostly made up of more modern releases. 2023 and 2024 have been a time that has brought a ton of new games into my collection, and I'm really excited to play them. I had to take a month away from that to do this challenge. At first I didn't really care and this didn't seem like a big deal to me, but soon every time I walked past my stack of PS5 and PS4 games or happened to look at my Steam library, I would feel an excitement to get back to the rhythm of finishing some of those games that I had bought recently that I was excited about. Another thing that's not any fault of the PS1 that I think led to me struggling with these feelings of burnout, especially at around the day 15 mark, is that I don't hate modern gaming and everything it stands for like some people do. I enjoy a lot of games, both modern and retro, and while I can totally understand and sometimes I even agree with a lot of the critiques of modern gaming as a whole, I just can't get on board with the black and white extreme opinion that modern gaming is just a big cesspool of half-baked releases and that nothing now is worth playing. I think by cutting myself off from these games, I actually wanted to play them more in a lot of cases. Okay, so now let's get to the reasons that actually involve my experience with the PS1 itself. So, this big burnout that took me quite a few days to overcome happened at the end of my time with Suikoden. After finishing this narrative-focused game, I just wanted to mess around with some other games on the platform that weren't as story-heavy, and the games I did try this time just left me feeling a bit uninspired. With games like Twisted Metal, I was kind of bummed because I was really looking forward to trying this game, and I just wasn't really into the way that the game controlled. I just found it to be a clunky kind of mess. It just wasn't very fun to me personally, and I am going to try other games in this series later on because I think that maybe they get better. I mean, they kept going for a while, so I'm assuming they get better. But yeah, the first one just wasn't for me. I also gave a chance to both FIFA and ISS around this time, with the latter being way more enjoyable, but I think that, once again, I was just having trouble feeling inspired after I just finished a decent-sized RPG game. So I do think that overall, some of my lower moments in this challenge when my desire to play was low was down to just needing time to let the bigger narrative games I had beaten breathe. The other issue that it was actually part of the PS1 was just some of these mechanics and controls just didn't age incredibly well in my opinion, and it led to me feeling frustrated at times. A lot of the quality of life changes of modern games, or even more modern releases of these games themselves, offer a bit more of an enjoyable experience. Things like unskippable cutscenes before difficult fights that you may have to watch multiple times can make some games just drag on or really frustrating. In more modern games, like the newer releases of the older Final Fantasy games, you can turn off random encounters or breeze through them if you're just in it for the narrative experience, and these are kind of nice to have, I'm not gonna lie. As far as the taking breaks after long narrative games, Metal Gear Solid and Tony Hawk Pro Skater 2 brought me back into the challenge after I had kind of fallen off a little bit, but after finishing Metal Gear Solid, I took, 7 days off to just kind of write reviews and just let that narrative kind of chill. And this led to me feeling conflicted over the state of my challenge and how many games I was going to be able to dedicate my limited time to. Taking time to process is something that I do in my personal life when I beat a game. I usually take a week or two to work on my scripts if I'm going to review the game, which, this time I didn't necessarily have the time to do. So I kind of beat myself up over feeling like I would let down the PS1 lovers by not getting around to Resident Evil or Xenogears or Final Fantasy IX or Castlevania Symphony of the Night. But I realized that this was supposed to be a normal month in my life, just with a PS1 as my sole gaming option. And so as such, I do feel like finishing the 3 games that I did while having a full-time job and other obligations was pretty good progress for me after all. Ultimately, if you feel like I missed some stuff, because I obviously did, that's okay, and it's true. I do have plans to continue beating some more PS1 games, especially the survival horror stuff and the JRPG stuff, and of course, I will review those games when I get around to them if they feel like games that I can make videos about. I chose the games that I chose because they stuck out to me, and I did my best to show some love to as many titles as I could, and overall, I had a good time with the original PlayStation. So let's talk video games. So I decided to just go ahead and rate all of the PlayStation games that I played over the last month, rather than just highlighting games in the way that I did in my Nintendo 64 video. I'm going to do this through the good old tier list method, and this is just meant to be a more laid-back, casual way to cover all the games I played without necessarily writing a whole script, and just give, what I actually thought in a more concise manner. So let's do the tier list. Alright everybody, and welcome to the tier list portion of this review, which is the, it's off the cuff, he's unscripted, he might go buck wild. Producers, get ready to lose all the money for the channel. Yeah, somebody better be ready on that censor button. Let's just get into the tier list. This is unscripted. I just wanted to have like a little casual, let's talk about video games, yay, okay. So first up, I wanted to talk about, this is, I made this on Photoshop. It's very basic. It's the basic tier list. It's S tiers, the greatest, cream of the crop, greatest PS1 games. These games are still pretty fun today. A tier is great games. I think they were fun. Maybe they just, didn't have enough oomph to get into the S. B is pretty good games. C are games that I just didn't play enough, or it's average or mid games I did play enough. And D tier are the stinkies, the ones that I probably would never play again. First up, we're going to do ISS Soccer. I am a big soccer or football fan, and I could put this down here because I didn't play it really much of it at all. But what I did play of it, the competitor that I played the other game of, I didn't feel like that was as good as this. So I'm going to go ahead and put this in B tier. I think that the gameplay was just a little more realistic. Like, it was like, I don't know how to explain it really. It's like slower and more methodic and like heavier. And it is still an arcade football game, but it has like enough of that slower gameplay that it didn't feel like the ball was zipping around the screen like a pinball. And that's kind of how I felt about the next game, which is FIFA 2001. This game isn't bad, but I'm going to put it in C because, one, I didn't play it enough. And also, I do feel like it was worse than ISS in my opinion. I don't really like the zippy, zany, ball flying everywhere kind of soccer games. So this one was my preference. So the next game we're going to be talking about is a legendary survival horror game that I didn't play during this challenge, but I'm going to include it because I finished it. And that is Silent Hill. I could put this here because I am not the biggest fan of tank controls. I find them clunky and kind of annoying. But I think based on the atmosphere, the tension that this brings to the table, and really, what this would go on to do for the horror genre and all the inspiration and stuff of making like psychologically horrifying games, I think that this game deserves the S, honestly. Yeah, the gameplay was not all for me, but I think that the vibe and the presentation were pretty good for the time. And I also think it's just really, a lot of it was clever. I have actually reviewed this game, so at the end of this video, there'll be a link to the playlist of all of my reviews. If you want to check that out, you can. But yeah, this, I just think that the, including the fog, because like the limitations of the draw distance, that actually made for the game like way more eerie. And I think a lot of stuff like that is just really cool about this game. So yeah, this is going in the S tier. The next game is another certified hit, and that is Tony Hawk Pro Skater 2. This is going straight up into S tier. I don't necessarily like doing the side ratings because they're two different games. They're two different genres. I don't really know which one of these would be better than the other one. So I can say from a gameplay perspective, I like Tony Hawk Pro Skater 2 a lot more than I like Silent Hill, but I also can recognize that this game is like very artsy and, art house, and it's very edgy, and I kind of like that. So I'm not gonna do the side thing for these. Tony Hawk Pro Skater 2 is a great game. It dug me out of my burnout ditch with the PS1, got me through some pretty dark days with the PlayStation, where I just wasn't feeling super inspired. This game's gameplay holds up incredibly well today. It's still a lot of fun. And honestly, I grew up playing Pro Skater 4 for the GameCube, and I think like obviously the visuals are a lot better on the GameCube, but gameplay wise, this isn't that far away from that, and I thought it was a lot of fun. So yeah, that's an S tier. Very pleasantly surprised that it held up as well as it did. Next up is Twisted Metal. Now, you already saw it pop up there. Yeah, this video has been recorded more than once. Ooh, it's a C tier. It's not because I didn't play it enough. I just didn't really like this game that much. And I'm sorry to those of you that love Twisted Metal. I tried, guys. I really tried, fellas. One, I'm terrible at it. Two, I don't like the way it controls. It's very clunky. Very, like, I just didn't like it. And, maybe it's just me. I'm willing to say that it could just be a skill issue. But yeah, I just didn't really like this game. I didn't find it to be very fun. So it's going in the average tier because I thought like the vibes were cool. Like, it's Armageddon death racing, but yeah, I just didn't like the execution that well. Next up is Incredible Crisis. Now this can go at B tier, and if we really wanted to do the side things, this would obviously be ahead of this because I played a lot of this. Incredible Crisis is pretty cool. It can be very frustrating. Like, some of the expectations of how fast you can hit that button is crazy, but I think it's wacky. It's very funny. Yeah, like I said in my video, it was a very good palate cleanser for Suikoden, which was, more serious, more JRPG stuff. So this was like really cool to just play and kind of laugh at, even, when I wasn't like wanting to swallow my controller sideways. All right, next up we have another sports game, sports entertainment game, which is WWF SmackDown 2. Yeah, this is supposed to be a really good wrestling game. I really did not play this one enough, and when I did play it, I didn't really know what I was doing, so we're just gonna put it here. I don't have a lot to say about it because I did not play it enough. Next up, we have a launch title for the PS1, and that was Air Combat. This one I also did not play enough. Honestly, it made me sick. I've never had motion sickness before with the video game, and this one being a first-person like pilot game made me kind of sick. Yeah, I wasn't able to play very much of this, so I feel like it's not fair for me to rate it. Next up is a PS1 launch title that I did play a decent amount of, and that was Ridge Racer. I believe this is an arcade game that was put on the PS1, and that was something that Sony really focused on with the PS1, was securing like some Namco and like, you know, other kind of games that would have been in arcade cabinets, because that was like a big drive for this was, imagine if you could take Ridge Racer home with you. And yeah, I feel like this was fine. It's kind of hard, I'm not gonna lie. Like drifting without like making your car screech is kind of difficult to do. But yeah, I think this is like a B. It's fine. There's nothing wrong with this game. Next up is NBA Jam Tournament Edition. Just didn't have a lot of fun with this one. Didn't play it a lot. I'm sure it's fun if you get into it. For me, I just didn't enjoy it that much. I don't feel like it's bad enough to go down here, but it's just something I didn't really engage with very much. Next, we have Gran Turismo. I'm gonna say for me, Gran Turismo is an A. I don't know, it could be an S. I don't know if I played it enough to say that it's an S. Maybe if I gave it a little more time, it would be. I'm gonna put it in A tier. It was very fun. I liked that it was pretty realistic feel. Like it had like the weight to the cars that something like Ridge Racer didn't necessarily have. And I know this is supposed to be like a simulation kind of game. And I have played some of the more modern ones, but yeah, this was pretty fun. I feel like it could go up here had I, you know, really gotten more into it. But from what I did play, very fun game, very solid. Definitely better than these three. So yeah, we'll put it up there. Next up is one of the games that I finished and the review will be coming soon. That is Suikoden or Suikoden. This is a JRPG. It kind of got, I mean, it's getting a remaster and a lot of people know about it now, but from what I was reading and what I understand from some of my friends, this game didn't necessarily get the shine that it was due back in the day. And a lot of people feel like that's a shame. And I can say that a lot of the mechanics of this game and stuff were really, really cool. I also think that this game, I would probably put it, the story is really good, the gameplay is really good, the soundtrack is pretty okay. I don't know if it's an S tier. Yeah, I think it's definitely an A tier. This is an A tier JRPG. Very good game. I'm really glad I played it. And you'll have to wait for my review to hear more about that. But yeah, I feel like this is a super, super solid JRPG. I just don't know if it's up here, and I also feel like maybe if I played more of the series and they're better, they would maybe go up here. So yeah, we'll just leave the Suikoden right there for now. Next up is Crash Bandicoot. I beat about half of this game. Really, really like this game. I think this is probably an S tier, honestly. Like, I felt like the platforming was really, really good. It's very frustrating. It's one of those games that makes you want to slam your head into a wall. But I feel like when it's working, it's working. Like when you kind of get into like a flow state and you just start hitting all those jumps and you're really like stringing together some solid platforming, it's a fun game. Next up is another one that I finished before the challenge had started, and that is Final Fantasy VII. This has to go straight up into S tier, obviously. And like I said, if we were doing the sideways thing, obviously this would probably be at the front of the pack up here, but we're not. We're just gonna put it up in S tier. So with Final Fantasy VII, I mean, I have a review of it. You can go ahead and watch that video. I talk about this game really in depth. This game is awesome. I mean, I really did live up to the hype that everybody said it would for me, and I was extremely thrilled with like how this game plays. There is some stuff that's aged kind of weird, like the stuff I talked about with unskippable cutscenes. This one's mostly during like the fight with Sephiroth. That cutscene is insane when he does Supernova. So yeah, playing this on a modern console where you can kind of speed stuff up is very recommended. Also, you know, skipping the random encounter sometimes can be nice. So yeah, this game, very, very good, and it really does deserve the praise that it gets. Next up was the last game that I finished, and that was Parasite Eve. With Parasite Eve, I feel like it's an A tier. I really enjoyed this game, but when compared to some of its contemporaries, I don't think that it did horror as well as something like Silent Hill, and maybe that wasn't the goal, but they were doing at least survival horror adjacent. And so I feel like this game was not scary at all, but it was very interesting. Like the story was super good, the gameplay was pretty cool, it just was kind of bare bones in terms of like, you pretty much, like in Silent Hill, there's like stuff to explore and stuff like this. Parasite Eve is very linear and there's not a ton to explore. It's mostly like you go from level to level of like that's it. You just follow the story as you go and you're either running around or you're fighting. There's not a whole lot to it other than that. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. I don't think it's a bad game at all. Like, hear me when I say Parasite Eve is very good, and if you haven't played it, you should play it. I just don't know if it's up here with these games. I think that it's definitely a great game. It's very close to being up here, kind of like Suikoden's really close to being up here. But, you know, comparing like it to some of its contemporaries, I just don't think it did horror as well as maybe they did. All right, next up is probably my favorite game that I played during the challenge of this. I don't know, Parasite Eve was up there. I did like that game a lot. From a narrative perspective, but I think a game that fired on all cylinders and really impressed me with like everything that it was able to do for the time it was released is Metal Gear Solid. This game is amazing, and I have already written and recorded a review for this game, so yeah, be on the lookout for that soon. I won't say too much about it because of that, but just know this game is as good as everyone says it is. It has aged a little, where it's like, oh, some of it's a little clunky and stuff like that, but it's got that 90s charm to it. And yeah, I had a lot of fun playing this. I really liked the story and the characters, and I was really impressed with how much like depth they could add to the gameplay. Next up is Ape Escape. This one I did play a decent amount of, and I feel like Ape Escape is probably an A. It's pretty good. It's like a platformer, and it's interesting, and it's fun and engaging, and yeah, this was overall like a really good game. And finally, we have Tekken 3. This is a game that I wish I would have been able to play more of, and I was actually supposed to play with my wife, but we just didn't have the time to kind of sit down and do co-op with this. So I'm gonna put it in I just see, but it's only because I didn't play it enough. It's not, I honestly think it'd probably be up here. I'm not really big on arcade fighters, but this one is really good. But I'm only putting it down here because I just didn't play it enough. So if you really want, I guess I could organize this by games I didn't play enough. I'll just put this way over here because this is like the only game in here that I feel like I didn't play enough. That like some of these other ones, this one I guess I didn't play enough because it made me sick. But I wouldn't play it again. So, and then these other ones, yeah, I kind of played these enough in this category to maybe say that like I probably wouldn't return to any of these. Yeah, this is the only one that I would probably go back to. So yeah, that is the tier list of all the games that I played on the PS1, whether, you know, they're Silent Hill or Final Fantasy 2 are the two that I finished before. The rest of them are games that I all got around to playing throughout the challenge, and obviously there's many more that I want to play. But yeah, these are the games that I played. This is my summary of how that went, and these are all the games. So yeah, let me know what you guys think. We're gonna get to the conclusion now. Thanks for sticking around. The PS1 is a generation-defining piece of technology that became one of the key players in the turn of the modern gaming era. It is a system that gamers of the time cherish, prop up, and constantly praise, and after spending a month with it, I can see why. While I did struggle with the age mechanics or less fun controls of some games, the highs of this console's library make it easy to see why so many people look back on it fondly. There seems to be a ton of high-quality releases that were created at a time where exploring new ideas were supported by many companies. The gaming world entered the 3D space and had access to more intricate and complex audio options, better graphics, animated cutscenes, and the ability to tell newer and bigger stories. And I feel like doing a month with these systems is definitely a good way to test how my own personal taste will line up with them. And what I can say is with the PS1, I enjoyed it a lot, and I found a lot of love in the titles that I did play. That being said, I'm also very happy to be returning to a world where I can play both retro PS1 games, which I'm not going to say which ones, but I've already started a couple, and modern games again. I guess we won't know which one I prefer between the PS1 and Nintendo 64 because of the variables of the test being wildly different. Maybe one day I will go back and give the Nintendo 64 a fair shot, and then we'll see. With that being said, thank you for watching and sticking with me for this long. I appreciate all of the support. If you did like this content, be sure to leave a like on the video and tell me what your favorite PS1 games are in the comments below. Make sure to subscribe and hit the bell icon so you never miss an upload, and until next time, take care of yourselves, Plupa Troops. Peace.